in case they missed the introduction, I'm Jon Stravers. If you Google the Hawkman of Iowa, a bunch of stuff will come up. But I'm going to talk about red shoulders and ceruleans and some raptor migration stuff. But I just want to entertain you for a little bit and throw out a few photos from the desert Southwest. I spend part of my winter every year for the last 27 years or so in the desert Southwest. And so I'm really fond of that. See if I can keep moving. And one of my species down there that I love is the Harris hawk. Really cool birds. Chiricahuas, one of my favorite places, the Chiricahua Mountains in southeast Arizona. The Apaches called this the land of the standing up rocks. It's just a mystical place, and part of that range, it's just a few miles north of the Mexico border and really close to the Arizona-New Mexico border. It's a result of 27 million year old volcanic eruptions. And one of my favorite places within that is Portal Canyon. This has really special meaning to me because my son and I explored a lot in this area. And a few years ago, I was rambling around in here and I hadn't talked to anybody for 2 days. And this woman comes walking by and she says, "Didn't you used to work for Hawkwatch?" And then she says, "Aren't you John's dad?" This is years after he'd passed. And so I met in a random wilderness area someone who knew my son, had worked with him. So this is a special place to me. I love the Chiricahuas. And I love the raptors down there. That's the Harris hawk. And this is one of the few hawks that's kind of social. They hunt in groups. And I don't know, I'm fond of them. Also, John showed me the gray hawk. This is one of the rarest nesting raptors in the United States. It's more of a Central American species, and the northern part of their range goes into New Mexico and Arizona. And I found them nesting along the San Pedro River in southern Arizona. Gray hawks, really cool. And here's a photo that a friend of mine took. The rest of these photos, I've taken most of these, but this is by Jerry Ligori, who's a famous hawk watcher. And one of the species of interest down there is the black hawk. In Costa Rica, they call it Gavilan silvedo, whistler hawk. But it's kind of a lot like red shoulders. It's like a desert red shoulder riparian habitat. Anyway, there's other birds down there too. I love the black-throated sparrows. They're kind of common, but I just love their distinctive markings, black and white. Really a fairly common bird, but I love them, black-throated sparrows. A couple of years ago, I was in Patagonia State Park and I found elegant trogon. That's really a cool bird. That's really a cool bird. That too is a Central American species. Their northern end of their breeding range goes into the Arizona and New Mexico. And last year I found the vermilion flycatcher. Anyway, I love to photograph the moon, but we better get back to red shoulders, right? Red shoulders, this is a species I've been working on. Dean Rosa introduced me to them, and Jim Bednar is back in 1977, and I was a field assistant for them for a couple of years. And then I took over the project in 83 and I've been working on it ever since. And red shoulders are our coolest raptor, okay? They just are, okay? They have that contoured wing linings. Pretty small footed hawk for their size because they're a little bit smaller than a red tail, but they have that banded tail and their feet are pretty small. They're kind of a crayfish and frog and snake hawk. As they get older, their eyes get darker and their tail plumage becomes darker as well. I love that cinnamon color of their breast. I think one of the old names was called the red-bellied hawk. They start their territorializing in March. Some of the birds winter on territory. I think the tough females stay through the winter. And they go through territorializing and courtship in in March, lay their eggs at the end of March or the first few days in April. And they incubate for about a month, and then they hatch around the first part of May or the last few days in April. A lot of the birds that I work with really have had a high nest site fidelity. They keep coming back to the same territory, sometimes the same nest. This is Rusty and Rastel. And the interesting thing about this photo is you see these little white fuzzies. See that? Every active nest. Now, for instance, pretend these birds had left the nest and I came and found the nest and the birds were gone, but I'd see these white fuzzies. They place these on their nest. It's from their breast feathers. And that flags the nest as being active. So anyway, they have a high fidelity to some of these territories. Get more into that as we go along. So a lot of the work is done in March and then in April. And we get that first little bit of green. And they're along these backwater sloughs along the Mississippi and lower parts of the tributaries. So the title of this slide is, I'm on my way to work. You guys were supposed to laugh at that. Anyway, the young hatch about the first few days in May or the last couple days in April. They're really steady on their timing for some reason. Some raptors within the species, they have varying egg laying dates and commence, but red childers seem really strict about their cycle. So these are just fuzzballs, only 5-7 days old. And they get about 10 days old, they can hold their little heads up and look over the little fuzzballs. And then they turn into bigger fuzzballs. This is one of my favorite photos. This is a pair. This female was named Ruby, and she used this same nest 13 years in a row. She went through 3 different male partners during that time, but she used the same nest 13 years in a row. There's a giant cottonwood tree, huge. This is 62.5 feet high. And yet the support branches for this nest, each of these 3 branches is over 10 inches in diameter. And she was a good bird. And you can see, because four in the nest is not that common. But these birds are right at 3.5 weeks. They grow their skeletal structure and their foot structure in the first 3.5 weeks. And then they're in the nest for about 40 days, and these guys are halfway through. And so the second half, they grow their feathers out. For instance, if you look at these birds, they're only 3.5 weeks old, but their foot is already, and their feet and skeletal structure is already the size of an adult. Anyway, I'll get into this later. This is one of the territories that was active year after year after year after year. But in the last decade now, all the sites along the Mississippi have gone inactive. Now, that's not true of the tributaries, but we've had such severe flooding and such extreme flooding in the previous 10 years. This last year was not bad at all. But the previous 10 years, we had such long-term flooding that something drastic has happened with the sites on the Mississippi. I'll get more into that later. This is a nest at Paint Creek in Yellow River State Forest. This is Rufus. This is Hooter. He never shut up. And this is Twimbly. And in the back is the youngest bird, Charismatic. Rufus is the oldest by he's about he's about 10 days older than the bird in the back. See that? You tell by the top of his head, the brownness of the top of his head. This is the youngest bird. This was a good pair too. I was really fond of this female, and this male was named Snakebite, but I lost this nest the year after this photo. There's a big storm and a neighboring tree fell right into the nest and just destroyed the whole nest and the female who was on it. Dang. Anyway, this is Ziggy and Zelda. They're from Paint Creek to Confluence. They're getting close to fledging, really a few days away from leaving the nest. And this is a first year bird, a couple months after he was out of the nest, ready to take on the world. And this is a second year bird in Florida. I just love their dark eyes. Now I showed you all those fancy photos. That's cool. But when I'm doing this work, I very seldom get to see those birds. They are so secretive and the habitat is so thick that it does not allow for a lot of visual. And so those are great photos, but when I'm out there, I seldom get to see what I just showed you. I do most of the work by vocalizations, listening to the birds tell me the story. And once in a while I get this, okay, this is just, I can tell this is a red shoulder because of the terminal band on the tail, 1/4 inch white terminal band. So I know it's a red shoulder. Well, I know that's her nest because she uses this nest as a Paint Creek. But I do a lot of that work by sound. I first started working with the idea of sound because I realized that successful nests, that birds were noisy, and the quiet territories, when you climb the nest, you realize that something had failed. And so I started paying more attention to what the language was. And then I learned how to tell the territorial call of the male, which is kia, kia. It says it a certain way. And he's basically saying, this is my territory, my territory, my territory. Okay. But I learned to listen to the call back. And that's the female. I was listening for the female because her call is just a little different, a little quieter, has a little bit different innuendo, a little bit intonation. And then I would follow her because she's smarter, right? And she's always closer to the nest. She really stays close to the nest throughout the whole breeding period, where the male might coyote me all over the territory back and forth, but the female is usually closer. So I could go on and on about red-shouldered language because I've been recording them for years. And there are things in their language that gives you clue. I can tell when they're in courtship, they talk a certain way. And then when they go to incubation, they talk differently. And then after the young hatch, the language changes. So lots of times I can tell what's going on in a territory by the language. And I can even tell, I've gotten used to my birds and I know who's talking, so to speak, but more about that later. But I love the habitat. These floodplain forests, they're mystical. It is not the easiest environment to work in, okay? It's a schizophrenic environment because these areas can be flooded for just a few inches for a few days, or they can be flooded with 6 or 7 feet of water for months. And so some years it's one way, some years it's another. But I love it. I love the work. And so I spend a lot of my time slogging through in hip waders. And sometimes when it's deep enough, I have to boat through the forest, really. And so, I don't know. It's 44 years and I'm still doing it. So there must be something to the hook. Here's the other thing. A lot of these habitats are poison ivy during the nesting season, but I've never, even though I'm in it all the time, I've never responded to poison ivy. So I must be genetically dispositioned to do this kind of work. Just a little summary. This may not make a lot of sense, but this is the mapping of the territories along Paint Creek. This is the territory at Confluence, and then about 1,000 meters up, the second territory, 1,000 meters near the confluence of Browns Hollow, another territory. And so you can see how they space their territories. Now, this is the 2018 map, but all of these sites were active again this year in 2020. This one hasn't really produced the last couple of years, trace. And this one, we don't always know where the nest is, but the birds are there. But this gives you an idea of the spacing. Here's 1,000 meters. They kind of keep about 1,000 meters apart. And then this is Yellow River, Effigy Mounds. There's a pair down by the confluence, pair here, a pair by the Ferguson Terrace, and another pair on up. Now this year, this nest went inactive because of the flooding, same result of the Mississippi. So this year there was a nest here, and then another nest here. I don't know if this makes any sense. Now here's the bad news. This is a Sni-McGill complex in Pool 10 along the Mississippi River. And these sites were active every year. This middle one was sometimes active, sometimes inactive. You have to have 4 females. You could have some males running around, but you got to have a female. But I always had at least 3 nesting territories for years, ever since I started, at least 3 territories. This went inactive, this went inactive in 2018, this went inactive in 2018. This one hung on, but now in 2020 and 2021, none of these sites were active. I searched and searched and searched, and we did Cerulean surveys all throughout this habitat. We did the red shoulder surveys in March and April, and the Cerulean surveys in May and June into July, and we never heard any red shoulders in that entire complex. So that is something I thought was not possible. I had no idea that could happen. Now, the good news is that the territories up the tributaries are doing okay. But we're kind of be watching now to see if these come back online, if river levels go down. I don't know. Anyway, this is a point where I talk about other birds in the red-shouldered habitat. So if there's any questions about red shoulders, you can score those now.
John, this is Terry, and I want to tell you your jokes are funny, and you can't hear us laugh because Sandy muted us all, but I'm laughing at the jokes.
Okay.
And second of all, the photography is just breathtaking. Those early shots you had of the Southwest were just amazing. So this is a fabulous talk. It's just wonderful.
So I have a question on how you do the photography if you're down on the river.
Well, first of all, I'm showing you the good shots, right? Okay. There's thousands of bad shots, but for the nest sites, I haven't been climbing in recent years, but I was a bander. And so for years, from the 70s up until I quit climbing a few years ago, I would climb to the nest and band the youngsters. So I would, when you see those fancy shots, I'm just right next to the birds. Okay, I'm right there in their face, if that makes any sense.
Can you see the questions that are coming up in chat? Somebody is asking what are possibilities why so many nests went inactive in the past 5 years?
Well, as I said, the environment is a schizophrenic, that it can be flooded and it can be not. But we've had such extreme, and this past year was more normal. But the previous 10 years were historically incredibly high. And not only high, but the water, the period of flooding was extended and into the summer, and sometimes even into the fall. And so when and the red shoulders are basically hunting these backwater pools, but when the water is so deep, it inundates everything. Now, there may be, now that this is maybe too long an answer, I can't, because my theory, my understanding of red shoulders is there are no nests of just individual red shoulders here or there. No, that doesn't happen. They are a community bird. If you remember those nests, if you remember those, the Yellow River or the Pink Creek, those territories are stacked right up against each other. And these birds, it's a community. The females know each other, they respect their territories. And there's also something I discovered years ago that I didn't get into. It's called, they have what's called a pre-courtship communal gathering. Before they start divvying up the territories, before they establish the boundaries of their nesting sites, they have this communal meeting of all the red shoulders in the territory. It's like a dating service, because that not everybody survives the winter, and they have to see who is there, how many females, and they have to have a core of females to have the active sites, and they have to be able to lure in the males. And there's usually a few unattached males running around, but you have to have females. But anyway, along the Mississippi, that deep flooding has really inundated their hunting territories. And first of all, I should say, I don't know that I know the answer. I'm only guessing, but there has been considerable tree die off in some of these areas. And so the interesting thing will be to see if they do come back online, if the flooding regime goes more into a normal level. I better keep going, otherwise we're going to get stuck on red shoulders. But I have to say too, I think at the end I give some credit. Iowa Audubon funded this thing this year. The Iowa DNR has done some funding for me in recent years. The Raptor Resource Project, the folks who have the bald eagle cam, they've helped with this. And Iowa Audubon has been helping with this. And several of the Audubon chapters, Quad City Audubon and Upper Iowa Audubon, have supported this research. So this will go on. The important thing I'll get into later is I'm 72, so I can't do it the same way I used to, but I'm kind of cultivating, hopefully, some youngsters who are keep this study going. But we've alerted the Fish and Wildlife folks, and we want to find out if this is the same in other districts, but there's nobody else chasing red shoulders that I know of, but maybe somebody will show up.
There is another question on the chat. Do you think the females are related?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm sure some are, but well, this is my personal opinion. Okay, they know each other. They know it's a matriarchal society, because they tend to stay on the territories, and it doesn't. If you got a bunch of males running around, you just got a bunch of males running around. Big deal. Okay, you got nothing. You might have a potential breeding supporter, but you gotta have the females to have a sustainable population. And back to, okay, so the important thing in maintaining red shoulder territories is to have enough habitat to support at least 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 female territories or females. And so it took me a while to discover this. In fact, that they have this meeting of everybody where all the red shoulders, if you could picture, I'm out hunting in early March, and it's cold. Winter isn't over yet. and you're searching, and you come into an area and all of a sudden there's 8 red shoulders in one territory, and everybody's making every possible sound that they know of. They're bumping into each other. They're doing all kinds of aerial acrobatics. And when I first got into that, I'm like, what the heck is going on? It took me years to understand what was going on, because that doesn't happen later in the year. Once they establish their nesting territories, they kind of, they stay in their territory. They don't violate the other birds' territories. But I kept finding this event, this gathering in the early portion, in early March. And then I figured out after quite some time that this is an important part of their social structure in the year. They're getting together to establish territories, and they have this meeting, this grand conversion. So I've been writing about it and have published about it, and I call it a rouge of red shoulders. But it's very important in there. It's very important because the females are figuring out, okay, I had this guy last year, but he wasn't dependable, so I'm trading him in. I'm looking for somebody else. Okay, that happens. And then when your youngsters come in, and they have to figure out, all right, where is there an opening for me? Okay, is there a chance for me? And some females are faced with the fact that they had a favorable male, but males tend to have higher mortality rates during the winter than the females do. So they may have to recruit another male, even if they didn't want to. They have to. So this is probably too long an answer. We better get going. Prothonotary warblers are cool. They're in the habitat. They're one of the birds that trip me, because not only are these important habitats for red shoulders, but what I found out over time is that wherever there are red shoulders, there's higher bird diversity in all the other birds. And prothonotary warblers were ones that really drew me in, but also species like tree swallows. And this doesn't belong there because it's not a bird, but it's sure is cute. It's one of the dragonflies. And wood ducks and pileatids. Don't you love pileated woodpeckers? I just love the crazy birds. They're wacky. They have some strange habits. But their nesting cycle is really going on at the same time the red shoulders. It parallels it in every way. So I know my pileatids because they're out there talking and making noise and drumming and building cavities. And look at that foot, zygodactyl, 2 in the front, 2 in the back. Anyway, it was. And for years, I was just red shoulders, red shoulders, red shoulders, red shoulders, red shoulders for everything. Okay, red shoulders, red shoulders, red shoulders. But my son grew up with this, and he learned this stuff. And at age 19, he took off and started doing working for Hawkwatch International as a raptor biologist at age 19. He told him, I'm 19, but I got 17 years experience. So he got the job. Anyway, he started his career out west in birding and quickly became really good at a bunch of stuff. And then he came back and he got on me about I was totally ignoring a couple species. And one was the cedar waxwings. It's just because that call is high enough that I wasn't paying attention. And the other one was the cerulean warbler. And he said, Dad, your ceruleans are up here singing it. And what led to this too was that in our first recording of our Big Blue Sky, we took our recording engineer out and he recorded all kinds of cerulean warblers. So I had to rethink everything and start trying to develop a better understanding of cerulean warblers. So I did. Okay, these are photos by Kat Bussey, who helps with this project. And it took me years to get onto them. And we first started working in the Sinai McGill and North Cedar unit. For instance, I had to work this whole area and realize this is pretty much cerulean no. This is cerulean no. This is cerulean no. But this is cerulean yes. And this is cerulean yes. Took me years to get onto that, but I did. We call this the Cerulean Trench. It's the North Cedar Wildlife Management Area in Clayton County. Okay. And then we started doing these surveys in along the Mississippi and in Yellow River State Forest. But in the last several years, we've really inventoried the entire Pool 10. We did systematic. This wasn't just me, it was Billy Ryder Maroff and mostly me, but some of him. But we took 4 years and we did a bird survey every 300 meters through the entire pool. So it took me years to go, this is Cerulean no, this is Cerulean no, this is Cerulean no, this is Cerulean no. No, no, this is 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 no. This is Cerulean yes, okay? This is Cerulean yes, and everything underneath it. But it took me years to get to that point, okay, of understanding that almost all habitats in Pool 10 are vacant of Cerulean warblers. But this Nye-McGill complex, where there's a series of ancient oaks and black walnuts and a little, just a critical bit of elevation, 1.5 feet, bingo, this is full of ceruleans. It's the center of the cerulean universe. Anyway, I better keep moving, but it took years to know what it was. We also did this in Yellow River State Forest. And I'm grateful to Kathy Carlisle, who has helped on the project. And we summarized our findings in Yellow River State Forest 2008 to 2020. Now, I'm not going to try to interpret this whole graph, but the blue lines are the number of surveys each different year. And the red lines are the number of points. So sometimes we're monitoring a point several times during a year. The green line is the number of active cerulean sites. But if you can see here, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. We did, now some of these are 5-minute point counts, some of them are 10, but they're all cerulean yes or no. But we did 3,356 points over the years. Oh my gosh, that's a lot of, yeah. Anyway, there's a lot of Cerulean warblers in Yellow River State Forest, and we still don't know the totality of it, but it's remarkable. This, we worked hard in Yellow River State Forest. This is the same kind of summary. We also did these surveys in Pool 10 and in Effigy Mounds and in Pikes Peak and in the Nye-McGill and Bloody Run wildlife management areas. So over that same period of years, we did a total of 4,934 points. And so a lot of these don't have ceruleans, but a lot of them do. So I'm not going to get too much into the graph, just to know that this program represents a lot of work over a long period of time. It was often funded by the Yellow River State Forest. This is the first bird survey that the foresters sponsored. I'm very proud of that. And they kept it going for 10 years. But we also had a lot of other support from other groups, the Audubon chapters and various other conservation organizations have helped. Just an example, this is Yellow River State Forest. Here's the walk-on junction unit, just right along Paint Creek. Big trees, good habitat, no ceruleans. Basically find two unreliable territories along the river. That habitat, there's a lot of pine there. This red stuff is pine. And there are just no ceruleans there. And then the Lesser Heights unit, for part of it, is cerulean no, 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 no. But here, in this valley that winds around like this, bingo, ceruleans all up and down this valley. Every 125 meters, there's another cerulean. So this gives us some hints as to what to look for. I mean, they're obviously present in some places and obviously absent in others. Same thing in Little Paint. This is a Little Paint Creek, thick. And then just in the north unit, the rest of the north unit, none to be found. So really, we've been looking at this habitat and trying to figure out all the features which we think attract ceruleans. And a lot of it has to do with forest structure. A lot of it has to do with forest species. They like the big old trees. I call this the hoodoo oak, but they also like to have the younger growth, which becomes really important in forest management, in that even age management doesn't seem to help, but uneven age management, especially savanna or shelter wood cuts, do seem to help cerulean. So anyway, this back in the early days, I filed a report with the International Bird Committee of the Audubon and International Bird Conservancy, International Bird Life. So people from Switzerland, London, and New York decided this was globally important. And so Yellow River State Forest and the bird conservation area in northeastern Iowa, which includes Yellow River State Forest and these habitats that I've talked about, is now a globally significant IBA. I'm pretty proud of it. And they have a sign right at my favorite place in Larkin Overlook. They have this sign with ceruleans. And if you can see here, there's some red-shouldered hawks in there too, but taken by you know who. But anyway, I'm very proud of this. Kathy Carlisle has been a great field assistant and a great data manager. Sophia Landis is one of the new students who's helping out. So this just isn't me. Also, Paul Scrady, and we'll talk about him more in a little bit. There's a lot of people are helping with this. It's not just me. Ceruleans, you remember me talking about red shoulders and their language? Now I'm applying that. I've been recording ceruleans. I have like 3,000 recordings of ceruleans. And so you may hear this trill, but I hear the key of D and the trill. Does the trill last 0.9 seconds or does the trill last 1.3 seconds? And the important thing is it include an introductory note or not? And the real stickler is these are such steady singers. They just don't sing once in a while. No, they sing regularly. And do they sing at 8 seconds or do they sing at 11? Because if they're singing at 8 seconds, that means one thing. If they're singing at 11 or 11 and a half, that means something completely different. And so I can tell my ceruleans by their language, and I can tell who's mated and who's not. And I can tell if they're in courtship, and strongly, they show up usually around the 3rd or 5th of May, and they sing intently for the first few weeks. And then all of a sudden, around the 29th of May or the 1st of June, sometime around there, the language changes abruptly, and bingo, that is completely associated with going on eggs. And so, as everyone knows, when you're in courtship, you talk one way, but then when you're raising kids, you don't talk the same way. And so I can tell a lot what's going on with my ceruleans just by the way they're talking. I owe a lot of this to maybe some of you have heard of the bird lady of Iowa, Gladys Black. I met her when I was just a kid at 26, and she changed my life. I started studying with her for a couple of years, and I could go on and on about her. She gave me the right books at the right time, kept me on the track of doing raptor stuff, and introduced me to Dean Rosa, who then literally, she changed my life, and I've been on a path of chasing the bird dream ever since I met her. So I owe her a great deal. She was wonderfully odd, but devoted, just devoted to bird conservation. I admire her still this day. Anyway, just random photos, because I have 2 brothers who live in Florida. So every year I go to Florida in the winter, hang out, chase birds, egrets and purple gallinules and green herons and the terns and the black skimmers and the egrets and the roseate spoonbill. Oh my gosh. Now watch this bird, okay? kind of white, got the pinkish. And just a few weeks later, bingo, they go into breeding plumage, and then that bird looks like this. Oh my gosh, it's a transformation as they molt into breeding plumage, kind of like a firebird. Roseate spoonbill. In Spanish, pico de spatula. Anyway, and little blue herons. You know, we call our great blue heron great blue herons, but he's not gray. He's not blue. It's gray. These are more bluish. And a lot of palm warblers down there. This is a very cooperative double-crested cormorant. But look at this plumage. Look at this. Look at this. He's dried out completely, you know. But look at this. I got close enough. Look at this. This is like a piece of art, isn't it? It's like carved symmetry. I don't know. I love that. But of course, the most mystical raptor down there is the swallow-tailed kite. Don't you love those guys? Oh my gosh. They are very unpredictable. They just slash all over the place. They don't sit around. They fly. They just always on the wing. I love these guys. In Spanish, tijería, little scissors. Okay. I'm trying to get finished because I think I'm going overtime here for you guys. We're during all this time that I did the red shoulder work, the cerulean work, and all this, I've always been studying raptor migration along the Mississippi. Dean Rosa got me started that in 1976, and I've been doing it ever since. So we've always had a banding station. Now, in recent years, a Raptor Resource Project, the same people who do the bald eagle cam and do the peregrine work have been sponsoring this. And we have a banding station just outside of Decorah that we work with Luther College students. This is Kathy Carlisle. She helps with this. And we capture migrating hawks, band them. And I could go on and on about this. This is a crazy, crazy business, but I love it.
Don, please don't worry about time. You have plenty of time. This is fascinating, so don't hurry.
Okay, I'll slow down. That's good. Thank you. Thank you very much. And we're getting some youngsters involved. This is one of my new hopes. His name is Eric Murray. He was a student at Upper Iowa University, a student of Paul Scrady's. And he's not only been good at raptor migration, but he's been trapping rough-legged hawks during the winter. Trapped somewhere around 20 rough-legged, but 70 species during the winter. Down by you guys, he's from Columbus Junction. So he's been doing this work down by you guys. This would be a good sponsor. This guy needs a little bit of gas money during the winter. So if there's if you guys have any projects that you want to help with, this is the guy. He's a hardworking kid, and he's better at all this stuff than I ever was. And he was a good student of Paul Scrady's, but he's like a farm kid. So he's better than me at all this farm stuff and equipment and managing things. I admire him. Anyway, he's helping on the project. And then Paul Scrady, who is a professor at Upper Iowa University, has been helping with the red shoulder observations, with the Cerulean Warbler stuff. In fact, he's going to take over the Cerulean Warbler work because I'm getting old for this stuff. But he helps on this. I could talk a lot about him. He's a cool guy. He brings a lot of, he's good at the things that I'm not so good at. And he's good at filtering through what needs to be done and taken care of. So I appreciate his help. But this too, it was Dean Rosa. This is a photo from the 70s. He was the state ecologist. He was the guy who got me started in this work. In fact, October 12 of 1976, I came up here to Northeast Iowa and we trapped a hawk, and my life hasn't been normal since that date. But here's a little bit of summary. The X here is our banding station in Northeast Iowa, okay? The A here, that represents a peregrine falcon that we It was originally banded as a nestling in Greenland by a team of raptor researchers that I knew. And we caught her, she was banded in July of 1983. We caught her in October 19 of 1983 on her way down to the other end of the other hemisphere, a peregrine, okay? B is a goshawk that was banded in Duluth, and we caught that goshawk just a few days later, the same year at our station. C is a bird we banded, a sharpshin that was eventually recovered. It was electrocuted accidentally in Costa Rica, not far from where my daughter was stationed in Costa Rica. And D is a peregrine falcon that was banded along the Tanao River in central Alaska in 1994. And in 1999, October, the first weekend in October during Hawkwatch weekend, we caught that peregrine 5 years later at our station in the Mississippi. Now, the oddest one of these returns is F. And this is Ernesto Rulas, lived in Veracruz, and he knew he was on a highway of raptor migration. And he came up and studied with me and other raptor biologists at a site in Nevada and for Hawkwatch International in 1989. And he went back, and after some advice from everybody, we're full of advice, right? He set up a monitoring station and ended up documenting one of the most monumental raptor migrations anywhere on the planet. You can see 80,000 raptors in a day. I'm not kidding you. I'm not making this up. 10,000 in an hour. Now, the interesting story about this, he set up a banding station and he was seeing thousands upon thousands of raptors, but he wasn't a good trapper, and he struggled with the trapping. So I sent a friend of mine down, a youngster, one of my moonbow hawking students down there, and he helped change his station and fixed him up, brought him some equipment, gave him some advice, helped him get things set up. And lo and behold, in 2004, I caught a raptor, a Cooper's hawk, an adult female. She was one of the healthiest birds I've ever handled, that Ernesto had banded 4 years earlier in Veracruz. You can't make up stories like that. My God, I caught a bird that a friend of mine had banded that I helped get. That's nuts. I love that. That's nuts. Most of the birds we capture are not banded. This is only the few. Here, I'm almost done here, folks. This is our red-tailed. Red-tailed hawks are our most common species, right? And so this is a diagram of our returns. These are red-tails that we banded, and then they showed up in these various places. The longest distance one was in the panhandle of Florida. The longest surviving bird was 16 years later. It was found in Oklahoma. But you can see these, there's a lot of raptor migration tends to go from northwest to southeast. And you can see how that kind of shows up. The green is our station, and these are where the birds have showed up. Interesting, this one showed up just a couple days later at the Chicago O'Hare Airport, where they trap them to keep them from running into planes, and they do away with them. Sorry about that. Anyway, I could talk more about every one of these birds, but this shows that a lot of the birds don't make it through their first winter. But if they do make it through their first winter, then their survival rate is much better. Then it's like maybe 20%. But this gives you an idea of where some of our birds go.
John, there is a Cerulean Warbler question about are the populations stable here, or do you see trends?
Well, you know, in a certain sense, I think so. Now, we're just uncovering, we're just peeling off the lid on this thing because no one had any idea. When I started this work, there was only 16 suspected territories in Northeast Iowa in the Iowa Ornithologists Union data. 16. Well, after the first 10 years, I figured I had somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 territories. So, you know, at first I didn't believe it, and people didn't believe it. Honestly, Paul Scrady was in the audience when I first started showing this, and he thought I was crazy. He didn't tell me that day that I thought it was crazy, but he said he thought I was crazy. But then he came up and started working on the project and realized, oh my goodness, you know. And so this has happened to a lot of people. And there's still people who don't believe the numbers just because they're so outlandish. But we're still trying to figure out what was going on. And my focus has been to just do what I can. But also, I didn't want it to be just, oh, here's some bird numbers. I wanted to affect the management. I wanted to make sure the people who are managing these areas knew it and were at least aware that what they did could have a positive or a negative impact. And I've gotten incredible results from Bruce Blair, who is the forester at Yellow River State Forest. And there's somewhat limited in effigy mounds as to what they can or can do as far as forest management, but they've had a positive response. And then I've been working with the Fish and Wildlife Service on the Mississippi River sites. And the real thing there is that almost all sites up and down the river, almost all the forests in the Mississippi floodplain are vacant of ceruleans. They basically are not very common anywhere on the Mississippi, but there are a few isolated habitats that when the conditions are right, ceruleans are all over. And our data that in a certain sense, I was just trying to figure out what we got. And so it's going to take some time to figure out if these territories stay occupied. But it looks absolutely, but my take on it is yes, I can go to a certain tree, and if I wait there, I'm going to hear a cerulean. Bingo, it's just that. And usually the wait period is 10 seconds or less, okay? Because in May anyway, when they're really doing their territorial singing, because they're just on it. They don't sit around and not sing. They basically are pretty much. So I think it's good, but it's going to take some time. One of the things that Paul Scrady would like to do is he would like to capture a cerulean and put a little geolocator on the bird. And that is just a little plastic band. But then the idea would be then if the bird comes back in the next year to recapture the bird and then take that geolocator off, and it has all the locations that bird has been in the previous year. So then you could tell if it was the same bird. And you could also find information about their route and about their wintering area. But here's the thing. You saw me with those, like every day now, I'm trapping birds, raptors, okay? Today I trapped 5 or 6 birds, Cooper's hawks, red tails. And I'm okay at that. I'm slow. I'm not that good at it, but I keep doing it, right? And I know how to handle raptors. But I am scared to handle small birds. Small birds scare me, okay? I can climb to a nest and handle a raptor. I can catch a peregrine or catch an eagle and I can handle them. But I will not net a cerulean because they keep fighting. And I know how to get a hold of a raptor and hold its legs and keep its talons out of my way. But those small birds are so delicate, and I'm a big oaf. And so I'm afraid of banding ceruleans. But Paul Scrady is not that way. And so he can probably find a way to do this. So I hope he keeps this research going and we can find out more about the long-term viability of these ceruleans. The big question to me is, okay, were these guys always here, and how do they transmit this knowledge? Because the data shows, the banding data is that ceruleans pretty much all winter in a precise location in the Andes Mountains of South America, which is Venezuela, Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, and some of the deep canyon habitats in Andes, some of the wildest territory in the Americas. And that's where they all go there. And so there's so much we don't know yet. And, you know, these birds, they take a month to get here, but they spend most of their year down there. So much to be learned yet. But these birds have found the driftless, and they know they like big tracks, they like big trees, they like young trees, they like water. And some of the association that I thought was perhaps structural, I'm looking at a big walnut and thinking this has the structure and this is what ceruleans like. But it may even be that they key in on black walnuts and red oaks and white oaks because of the insects associated with those birds. So there's a whole lot more that I don't know. I could make up stories, but I'll
Well, I think we have one more question about the red shoulders hawks that we missed. Do the males help raise the chicks?
Oh yeah, males. Yeah, if they don't, there's nothing happening. I mean, they have to, the female basically spends her time at the nest, defending the nest. And the male has to hunt, like those 4-bird nests, those photos of the 4-bird nest. You know, those were males that were like, those dudes were working, man. They were working. Those guys are hunting at first light. I've caught them when there's just barely any light there, or the males have already brought food back in. They hunt during a full moon. They're out hunting frogs in the middle of the night because they can. And so, yeah, the males are out there working their tail off because, you know, when they're single, then they just have to hunt for themselves. When they hook up into a female, then when she's on incubation, they've got to hunt for her, right? Because she's just staying on the nest. But then when the young hatch, the guy has to go from, oh, I was hunting for myself. No, now I'm hunting for 4, okay? 3 chicks or 4 chicks and a female. So they are basically working night and day in April, May, and June. Here's my art, okay? This is 1,000.
Oh.
This is 1,100 stones. It took me 2 years, okay? But now I have a new one of these, and I make these at certain places. They have to have some bird significance, but I make these. It takes me usually a year to make these. So that's my version of art.
Jon, thank you so very much. It was a fabulous presentation. We'll try and figure out something.
Barry's still asleep though. Barry's still asleep. Look at that. You sound asleep. I'm sorry.